All right, so we are back with our next walking tour. Today I have Kristen Riggs from the Old Library Inn with me. So we say hi to Kristen real quick.
Hi.
And we are going to be walking in downtown Ridgefield today. So I'm going to go ahead and start our virtual stream here. And, downtown Ridgefield is a pretty amazing place if you haven't had a chance to make it out there just yet. Um, it has a lot of businesses that are down there, and the downtown core has been really kept pretty intact. So, you have a couple downtowns in Clark County. We have like Ridgefield and Camas that have a lot of the older buildings that were there, and so it's just really neat to be able to do this. And so, as we are looking at, we're going to go ahead and get into our video part right here. We actually started our digital walk in Overlook Park, and this looks over Lake River. And so the original inhabitants of the Ridgefield area were the Chinookan people, whose village was located on the banks or near Lake River. And in numerous publications, and one of the main people that did a lot of work was archaeologist Kenneth Ames, and he distilled much of what was known about the members of this early Chinookan village known as Cathapodal, and this was located again near the town of Ridgefield on the Lewis River. Actually, I apologize for correction there. And descriptions of the lower Columbia village, like Cathapodal, they come down from various sources, but there were a lot of missionaries, trappers, explorers, and people that came out and left a lot of accounts of this. And the archaeological evidence indicates that Cathapodal was founded sometime around what would have been 1450 AD, and Lewis and Clark actually noted it in their travels, and it is indicated in some sources that they counted about 14 houses there in total, which would have had some of about 700 to 800 people that lived there. And the population was present in that area as the village part all the way through the 1830s. And the people of the area were eventually ravaged by disease, and the village was disbanded, and people ended up being dislocated. And Lewis Clark expedition actually visited the area twice, once in 1805 en route to the Pacific Ocean, and the next time in 1806. And so that's where we have some of these accounts that we talked about. And so this has been an area that's had this kind of continuity of settlement and people living, and has had communities in the area for some time. And this is always just a nice, I mean, if you haven't had a chance to go to Overlook Park, Krista, I'm sure you get a chance to look at the park all the time. It's a wonderful, nice little park over there.
Yeah, it's really it's great because it's also the source of all of the community events, right? Or the home base for all the community events.
Yeah, well, and like you were saying, it's where his history is made today. And actually, in our video, we got this guy in the cart. I think he waved to us. I think he's down there quite often, right?
Yeah, it's awesome. As you can drive around with your golf carts, that is an active way he runs his dog. And normally you'll see his black lab chasing after him. Yeah.
So it's really, this place, it's a newer park, because it wasn't developed until a little bit later, and it has been kind of a center of this history making in the community, and also people in the community feel very open to come and actually have some leisure in here. And so the city of Ridgefield, we want to talk about the when the European people started to come in. It was around 1840 that a young Irish immigrant by the name of James Carty filed the first donation land claim in the area. And the donation land claim process was essentially coming out, and you would get 320 acres for a single individual and 640 for a couple. And actually, the title of the land was, when it was married couples, it would be both in the husband's and the wife's name. They would have a chunk of that property each. And so Carty filed a donation land claim of when he came in, and a portion of this is what occupies the northern part of downtown Ridgefield today. And his nephew, James Carty, later also set down roots in the area around 1872. And that's, in history, we love it when people name people after the exact same thing, because it makes it really easy to know who was doing what when. It's one of those things when you get those. And the younger Carty was actually born in Blackwater, Ireland on March 16th, 1839, and he left Ireland in 1853. And for some time, he followed the sea, during which time he participated in the Crimean War. And then he also came around the Horn of South America and arrived in what was called Union Ridge at the time, or what would be called Union Ridge, and then which is now Ridgefield, in the spring of 1858. And he left town between 1861 and 1872 to go and mine in Idaho, actually. And it was in 1872 that he returned to Ridgefield, and he was an active member of the community. And his son, William Carty, eventually was a state representative, was actually part of the state of Washington for 22 years. And the other part of it of the town, and we're actually seeing this right here because this southern part was a part of the Schobert claim. And it was believed that Carty was the only settler in the area until Friedrich Schobert arrived at a home and homesteaded about 320 acres, which includes the southern portion, which we're actually looking south right now at the building. And family members said Mr. Schobert chose the land because he wanted to log the heavy timber from the land and be able to do that. In 1865, a landing was established here on Lake River, and they actually called it Schobert's Landing. So, Ridgefield is interesting for having multiplicity of names. It has Union Ridge, Schobert's Landing, and then obviously Ridgefield today. And Schobert's Landing was a service center, and it was sufficiently important enough to actually get a post office, which was established. And it was the first postmaster was actually Asa Richardson, which no relation to me here. But it was at the same time that the name Union Ridge was coined. And it's believed it was called Union Ridge because of the large number of Union soldiers that came out to the area to establish themselves in this area. And eventually, it just started to grow. And it was around 1890 that Ridgefield actually changed its name. A man by the name of S.P. Mackey successfully circulated a petition to rename the area, and a meeting was called and decided to change it to Ridgefield as opposed to Union Ridge. And it was around this 1880s, 1890s, there was a lot of economic activity. And we're actually going to be talking about this building in a second, but the town was growing. Commerce came to Ridgefield in 1892 when Stephen Schobert and J.J. Thompson opened the first store. However, that wasn't all. There was attractions starting to come to the town at this time. There was a medicine show that came to Ridgefield around 1900, and people actually came to watch it. And they were sometimes, there was deep concern and skepticism as a hypnotist demonstrated his technique to people. So they were a skeptical group back in the day. And then there was one show that came to town during this early period of growth. So again, people were starting to try to come to Ridgefield. There was a human fly act that came to town during this time. Chris, are we going to have any human fly acts in downtown Ridgefield anytime soon that you know of?
Not that I know of, but I'd love to go see it.
I think we need to bring that back.
Yeah.
And so in 1892, the school opened on Maple Avenue. And actually, I'm gonna try a real tricky trick right here, and I'm actually gonna pull up a map. And here you can actually see the names used to be different. And so we see Lindsley here, we see Sargent, Lambert, and Southworth. And so I'm not sure where Maple Avenue, if it's still named the same this day, but that's kind of a nice little piece to realize that, these were different. And then in 1893, the first phone was established. And so it was during this time that Ridgefield was starting to think about that it needed to really incorporate. And at a special election in 1909, the people decided a vote of 62 to 12 in favor of incorporation. And the first city officials were James A. Smith, who was mayor, and then city council members N.C. Hall, A. Murray, J.S. Maxon, F.H. Gilbert, and Dr. R.S. Stryker. And the city clerk was J.W. Blackburn, and the city treasurer was E.A. Blackmore. And so at the time of its establishment, Ridgefield actually had its newspaper by 1909. And in the newspaper, it was advertising 2 general merchandising stores, a department store, 2 lumber mills, a water and well contractor and driller, 2 contractors and builders, a boat builder, a meat market, a hotel, a livery and draying, a boot and shoemaker, a creamery, a barbershop, a blacksmith, a realtor, and a weaver. So it was a hopping town in 1909, but it had a lot of stuff that happened before 1909. And one of the things was around 1883, 84, the Union Ridge Presbyterian Church incorporated. And so that's about 7 years before they changed the name. So you can think of their like Ye Old Stationery. They had to change that once it became Ridgefield. But this church was built by Henry Schober and another local carpenter on land that was donated by Stephen Schober and his wife on March 13th, 1883. And the Union Ridge Presbyterian congregation started even before the construction of this church. The congregation was established during the 1880s by a Reverend Aaron Lindsley, whose children lived in the community of Ridgefield. And actually, if we go back to that map again, we see right here, and I'm going to use the mouse with the magic of technology, we see Lindsley Road. And Kristen, actually, you were telling me that you knew a story about Reverend Lindsley.
Yeah, well, it was shared with me that after he was invited to come up and start the congregation there from Portland, and after service one day, unfortunately passed away in the street just in front of the church because his team of horses had taken off. And so they decided to dedicate the name in his name's, or the street in his namesake.
See, yeah. and that story, because we were talking about that earlier today, it was so interesting because they did not have a good run off when it came to the start of the church, because leading the original members after Reverend Lindsley helped establish the church was an individual by the name of George Sneath, which is kind of a Dr. Seuss-esque style name, Sneath there. And he was an English immigrant to the area. However, in August of 1883, Sneath died as a result of complications from a case of strep throat. And he actually contracted that his death was while on a trip up to Snohomish. So, I mean, this was a congregation that was really had tragedy right off the bat.
Oh.
And eventually, local Camas pastor J.A. Hanna took the pulpit for a brief time, and then the church building was actually officially dedicated August 3rd, 1884, from the records that we know. And the bell tower, the bell hangs in the church bell tower, was donated by local residents. And the first church service was held in that same year. And eventually, they had a reverend by the name of Angus Mackenzie, who took up the church, and he was the pastor from 1886 to 1892. And there's a couple other things. In 1903, the church membership was reported as 37, with Sunday school membership being 45. And actually, a devastating fire rolled through Ridgefield in 1927 that destroyed the schoolhouse, and the church was actually used to hold, so this building here was used to hold school in 1928 for Ridgefield students. And eventually the First Presbyterian congregation did move out of this, and they eventually combined with, I believe, the Methodist congregation in the community. And that congregation actually still has all of these records for this congregation, going back to actually the documents that have Stephen Schobert's signature on them. Which,
wow.
I mean, Chris, you've probably seen some documents and things as you're down there. I mean, just like,
yeah,
it's pretty impressive, right? When we see like these signatures that are over like 100+ years old, and realizing that like this land and the way downtown looks all derived from just that pen to paper.
Absolutely. And this is the oldest standing building, is that right?
Yeah. From what we can tell, it is the oldest standing building, and it's really that last connection to, kind of that pre-1910 Ridgefield, because there were some buildings and different things that were earlier than that. But this one, it's just stood the test of time. And it's interesting because you'll look in the back of it, and it's been added on from the original church. You can tell when you look at it. And then, there's been a couple of businesses in here before, right, Kristen? A couple of things have operated out of it.
I believe, yeah, there's restaurants over the time, and it was a small, like, private venue where people could do weddings and different things.
Yeah, and what's funny is I would love someday to take a look and see if there was a way we could, because it's always a big lift up to operate a museum, because you and I were talking about that.
Yeah.
We're a 501c3 nonprofit, so we have memberships we have to raise, and we raise about 90% of what we operate on. And so it's a big task, because you're not just holding history, but you're holding physical objects, and you have to do all kinds of particular things and have training to care for stuff. But I have had a pipe dream, and the city might kill me to say this someday, but I would love to have a satellite museum that we could operate for the town, up here, if we could find a way to produce the appropriate funds to do it, correctly with like the professional standards that we need to, because it just seems like it would draw, and I think we could make it a fun place for the community. And then Ridgefield is so tied to its history, that you really could just imagine this could be a nice little museum, up here in the town, and we definitely could operate a little satellite one.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yep. So
excellent. Well, Dee would be the person to talk to about that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going to, through the magic of this, I'm going to turn us around. And so this is what's called the Priscilla Study Club, and it was the Ridgefield Library, and it was built around 1934. And it was on February 14th, 1914, where women from Ridgefield organized the Priscilla Study Club, and eventually they established the Ridgefield Library. And in the beginning, the dues for the individual club were about 60 cents a year, so it was a tall order to be a part of this club. And they voted to use half of these funds for purchasing of magazines and books. And it was in June of 1923 that really their collection expanded, and the library was able to kind of, I think, officially start, in my opinion, when they got 377 volumes from the Frank Gilbert estate. And they operated for many years out of the city hall, and eventually through rummage sales, and I mean, they knew how to raise money. They were able to establish this, and I believe the building is repurposed, right?
Yeah, so we're really fortunate to currently be running a small bed and breakfast out of the old library. Yeah, and it's great because we hear all sorts of memories of people growing up and having this as their library. Even our grandma grew up here, and this is where she would come as a kid. And we are happy that those memories kind of can continue on with new guests, maybe in a little bit different way, but as they enjoy downtown Ridgefield.
Yeah, and it's really good because it's called the Old Library Inn that you're operating inside the building, right?
Yeah, we wanted to definitely tie it back to most people's memories of it as a library.
And I love your feed. I would recommend, if anyone's watching right now, go on. I think you're on Instagram, you're on Facebook, and you share a lot of history posts. Plus, you share posts of just your things that you're doing in the community.
Well, thanks. Yeah, we love to hear everyone's stories, and we'd love to have. We try to encourage our guests and all of our contacts to share their stories of what the building or downtown Ridgefield has meant to them.
Do you have I'm letting everyone know I'm putting you on the spot. Do you have a particular story that you found was really kind of neat that you've learned so far in relation to either Ridgefield or that someone shared with you?
I think one of my favorite cherished ones is that our grandma was a twin. And so she would come down and wait anxiously to read any new Bobbsey twin books that the library had. I also think that there's some really neat factors. As they put the building together, a lot of donations were given, and we've been able to keep as much as the building as we could have that we received. So I believe our mantelpiece came around Cape Horn and was given to us by the Wells family. So it's kind of nice that we were able to sand it down and restore it, but all of these years it's been kept in really great condition.
And that's amazing. And you were mentioning like the Wells family. I think there's the Bertel family. There's a lot of different people. There's a lot of families with longstanding history in Ridgefield, right? Like there's people, you'll just meet them and then,
Yeah, there's definitely many generations here where we can talk to someone who remembers coming to visit their grandma and stopping by or walking through. As they're coming by, they're really interested in what's going on with the building, and they stop to share that maybe their grandparents immigrated, or some even their parents were first residents here in Ridgefield, and they were able to continue those family ties, establishing lots of businesses or farms, and that it's kind of handed through the family, which I think is really great too. So one of one of our local members here, Kathy, at the hardware store, she was one of the last Priscilla Study Club members. And that's great that, one day she wanted to pop in and see and goes, I used to come here as the study club. So it's nice that we still have so many ties and so many generations running those same businesses.
Yeah, and it's incredible because there's a lot of that continuity and stewardship in Ridgefield, like you were saying, the Hughes family and all these different people that have been around for so long. And there is a lot of family businesses, or some family businesses down there, that they have this long standing. And that's what's so great about this town is like you have this, like I love like with your business that we have this building that was a library, and it was the space where the Priscilla Club, and they started this whole inertia that eventually the Fort Vancouver Regional Library System came over and started to kind of assist, and then took over, and then eventually the Priscilla Club did in the 80s eventually disband, but they really got this started. And the history is so present and it was so prevalent to everyone in the community that it felt like when you were looking at your business, I'm sure there was this kind of like, well, there's this logical tie to the history. Let's tie that history into the building.
Yeah, we love to carry on those stories and kind of we love to gather up the stories as well, because I think that's a big part of being a library here, but kind of encouraging it, since our guests, that's going to resonate, they're creating memories, but we just love the history here. And it's like home, right? It just instantly feels like a home.
And it is like when you walk in downtown Ridgefield, it's very comfortable space. It's walkable. It's nice. There's lots of friendly businesses. And actually, we're looking right now at the hardware store. So this one has been there's different dates associated with this. Some people say it was built in 1910. Some records indicate that it may have been built in 1916. But there was a building at this space, and what we know is in 1916 the Oddfellows purchased the northeast lot of this lot here on Pioneer to build a new structure to replace the lodge, which had actually burned down a year earlier. And by March of the next year, construction had begun on a new $3,000 building, which in 1960, that's quite a bit of money for $3,000. And the building was planned not only for the Oddfellows building, but also for a post office and a state bank and a hardware store. Because, hey, why not? Let's just have everyone have a big party in the building. And it was the Pfeiffer brothers, Friedrich and Warren, who quickly got to work in the hardware store building this business. And Friedrich Pfeiffer was born in 1872 in Wisconsin, and he came to Ridgefield in the early 20th century. And he lived in town until he passed away in 1952. And his brother Warren was also born in Wisconsin, and he was born in 1866. And he was prominent in civic affairs. He was on the city council member in 1921. He was the treasurer of the Oddfellows group in 1933, and obviously the owner of the hardware store. And both brothers moved to Ridgefield right about the time that it would have been possible for this to be established, and just in time to go into business. And they continued to co-own the hardware store and raise their families in Ridgefield. And shortly after the building was opened, it was actually targeted by robbers, which I don't know if you don't know this. I think a couple years ago, Ridgefield was claimed as like it had the lowest crime rate in Washington State. I think was one of the things I heard.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that still holds to this day.
Yeah, we're in the top 5 safest cities of Washington State.
Yep. So see, so we got the crime wave out early in Ridgefield in 1917. We got it out of the way, and so it was first in May of 1916 that the hardware store and the post office were hit, and then in August, burglars attempted to blow the safe at the Ridgefield State Bank, and they succeeded in getting into the vault, but they were unable to drill the safe to get the charge of nitroglycerin ready for to get in there. And the safe being constructed of solid steel, it was burglar proof. And entry was actually made by going through the rear window of the hardware store's the building, and cutting a hole through the wall into the bank, which was next door. And they did manage to damage the safe to a point where they actually couldn't use the safe anymore, and they had to close down for a few days while they could get that. And eventually, wow. I think they decided having a hardware store and a bank next to each other wasn't the best idea. And so they moved the bank, which we'll see later here. And so the hardware store is believed to be the oldest continuing hardware store in the Pacific Northwest, and it is now owned by Scott and Kathy Hughes, right?
Right. That's so exciting.
And Scott's involved in local government.
The Port of Ridgefield, and yeah, I think that kind of it's been really neat too to see so many of the families really be involved in directing the community and developing the community.
Yeah, because they're both like these business owners, but they pitch in and they participate in local government. And Scott, yeah, he's been a port commissioner for some time. Um, and so that's pretty neat. And it was funny on this day. I don't know if we've already missed the little shot, but there was some construction because they're building, I think like it's an overpass or something they're building down there, if I'm
Yeah,
correct.
they're going to continue Pioneer so that there's going to be some additional access to really bring downtown and that Lake River frontage together.
Nope. And that's why I was bringing it up, because we got our friend that we accidentally filled or filmed. And actually we had a question from Constance asking why it was called the Priscilla Study Club, and that was because there was a biblical figure that was related to education that they named the club after, from what I was able to research. And I'm pulling this off the top of my head. I should have had that in the notes, but I forgot. But I remember initially looking when it came to the Priscilla Club, and it had a biblical reference to a biblical figure named Priscilla.
Yeah, and
So
they really prided themselves on having a place to study and discuss subjects of substance that were not necessarily kind of the primary topics for women at that time. So they would talk about politics or science rather than maybe house, home care and that type of thing.
yeah, it's interesting because you did have in this kind of early 20th century period this rise of women's organizations that were focused on study. You had in Clark County, we had the Association of University Women, we had the Priscilla Club, we had the Vancouver Women's Club. There was one that's called the Dorcas Club. That was a religiously focused group. You also had what was it, Athenaeum, which was very similar in their studying patterns too. And it was this kind of place for them to come and study history, politics, different ideas, different thoughts. And it was also this rise during this kind of a period of self-edification where people were looking to public resources outside of maybe a university or school to be able to educate themselves. And it was in line with this same time that the public library was really gaining steam, because before this, public or libraries were tended to be more private people's individual libraries that they kept. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. They were trying to focus on this studying and bringing this kind of education piece to the community. And so this building here, it was the Ridgefield Pharmacy. I love this building for some reason.
Yeah, behind the little brick building tucked behind the trees there.
Yep, that little brick building right there.
Yeah, that's so cute.
It is, and and it's interesting. Maybe it's just because I don't think they're from trying to think. Maybe the and we're the very small brick building. If we look at that, I can actually I don't know much. I don't know any history about that, but if you look at it, the way the brick is shaped, I believe it's called Roman style brick, and so it's probably more of like a 40s 50s building. And then the one next to it is clearly like a you know early 19 or early 20th century building. And I can't recall a lot of brick facade buildings in downtown that I'm thinking about right now, other than City Hall and this one. And maybe that's why it stands out to me.
Yeah.
And this one was built. So again, it's really interesting because you have to look at land records in Ridgefield, because we don't actually have a city directory. So for Vancouver, we can dig into the city directories and we can say, okay, cool, on this day or this year, this building was at this address. We don't have that resource in Ridgefield. So we actually have to go through the actual land records and see when the dirt was sold to whoever, and when then that person's name shows up with a business in relation to that. So I kind of put a date range of like 23 to 33 for this, but we feel really pretty confident it was probably built around 26. But we do know it was owned by Bradford Galcool. And just in case anyone's wondering,
Yeah.
I am not a Bradford, I'm a Bradley. I wouldn't mind being a Bradford. It's much more regal of a name. But this building was built to house the Ridgefield drugstore, and Galco actually took charge and operation of the Ridgefield drugstore, because that operation actually existed before he even showed up. He took charge of it in 1912, obviously probably maybe in a different location. I'm not sure if it was at this place and they built a new building on this footprint. But it was noted that he would carry a full line of drugs, sundries, and would contact or conduct an up-to-date drugstore. And actually, Chris, you want to hear why I find that funny?
Oh, yeah.
So I think that should be unnecessary to say when you're talking about pharmaceuticals.
Hopefully, but maybe it's not snake oil.
Maybe it was like maybe that medicine show rolled in and then the human fly was peddling snake oil.
Yeah.
Who knows?
I do love that his daughter ended up being one of the first accepted to the university in Seattle for nursing. And so she continued on their family history in medicine.
Yeah, exactly. That's really pretty
Yeah.
neat. And that was around the same time that he established himself in this business here. And it's I one of these days I have to dig into the history of like pharmaceuticals and medicine more.
Yeah.
We did a Vancouver clinic, but we never did a full medical exhibit. But in Battleground, when we do the tour out there, when they opened the Dements, I never say it correctly, but they opened that drugstore out there and they actually advertised something similar where they said we're a grade A drugstore, and I'm like, I wouldn't want to find a grade B.
I
I mean,
know.
that's kind of an important thing to do correctly. So, it's pretty amazing. So he had this, and he actually worked with Dr. Stryker for a time because Dr. Stryker, from what we can tell, worked with him kind of paired up as a pharmacist physician thing. And Galco, before the time owning the pharmacy, he was employed with the Ridgefield Mercantile Store. And that was a popular store in town. And he was actually naturalized as an American citizen in January of 1916. And so when we talk about that immigration story to the United States and people coming in and being naturalized, we don't often hear about when people were naturalized necessarily. I mean, we can find it, but this one really stood out because it was listed in articles that talked about him. And he also worked as a local music teacher in addition to a pharmacist. And Galco actually organized and led the brass band in town for an extended period of time. And the town agreed that there was nothing like a good band to foster community pride. And so he was super popular because of this. And he had the band out for all kinds of occasions, and he would get many young people interested in that. And then I always say this wrong because I can never say it correctly. I had one of my staff members try to teach me, but he wasn't just into music. He also participated in some productions. And so he participated in the production of the Japanese operette Princess Chrysanthemum. I think that's how you say it.
Oh,
Chrysanthemum. There it is. I think I said it right.
fabulous. Yeah. So the flowers at Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. And it was held by Ridgefield students in 1917, and he actually played the role of the emperor in the production. Um, so just a fascinating story. And it's funny. Last night I started to think to myself, like, I don't know enough about Bradford Galcol, and I started to look, and there actually are way more articles than I've pulled. So next year when we can get back out on the street again and do these tours, like I think we're probably going to be able to have more expanded information, because I mean, just like with what you find with the inn, there's so many stories out there we don't know, right?
Yeah, I think it's great. And even Lily Wiggins, the shop owner, has some really great information about the building and the dentists that would work upstairs and the doctors. And
Was the dentist, was it a female dentist? Did she ever mention that? And again, I don't expect you to know it, but I was just thinking, because I actually was down at her shop one time and I got a pair. Oh, maybe that was an optometrist, so I'm guessing it wasn't.
yeah, I just know that the rooms upstairs were doctors and dentists. So it was kind of like a one-stop shop for health.
See, and there was a similar place in Vancouver. If you go downtown, there's a building called the Medical Arts Building, and that was the same place too. You go see your physician, and then there'd be a pharmacy, and it was this kind of complex where you would go and get everything taken care of. And it was in these smaller facilities, and each town kind of had its own place, which was really interesting. And Lily Wiggins is, what type of shop is that? It's an antique shop.
It is antiques. And so she, many, many years ago, had an established store in Selwood and relocated here in Ridgefield and has been having, I think it's definitely over a decade that she's been the only antique shop really in town.
That's awesome. It's a pretty fun place to cruise. There's pretty neat stuff in there when you look around. She's got a good eye.
Oh yeah, and she definitely understands what she has, and can share the history and the sourcing of. She definitely has real antiques, so um, it's better than just a thrift store.
That's awesome. Yeah, I always love going in there, and she's really set it up in a nice kind of intimate way. It's that nice calming experience. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So really, really good downtown Ridgefield business. And then here we're seeing the old Liberty Theater. So this was built around 1946, and this building is very interesting. If actually we'll take a look here real quick at the plaque. So it is dedicated to Frank Hicks. So Red Hicks constructed it. Um, but he oh I got Mary Kay in the shot there. And we'll circle back to that one in a minute, but first motion pictures actually came to Ridgefield in 1912, and they were being shown at the Schobert and Oliver skating rink.
Yeah.
So I guess you were like repurposing things, right? Oh, did you ever go to a skating rink when you were younger?
Oh yeah, well we had Golden Skate, but I have had a number of stories about the skating ring and some of those first films, just kind of popping up there. I think that's really fun to hear.
Yep. No, I remember Golden Skate as a kid too, because that was the place to go. And then the other one that I went to was the Oaks Park
Yeah,
uh, roller skating rink. I think the Oaks Park one is still there. Obviously, we have lost Golden Skate, sadly.
yeah.
And I've heard people talking about wanting to do a public works piece of art and put a giant golden skate down in front of whatever's down there.
Well, I
Which
think there's a number of people who can share maybe some missing teeth or broken teeth from their roller skating adventures, that might uh, definitely respawn to some a Golden Skate statue, I guess.
Yeah, no, it would keep the memory alive.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'll let people know because this was really fun. And actually, see Mary Kay dashing across the street there. You and Mary Kay came out and helped me because I have to have an adult paired up with me when I do these, or I might get hit by a car. So
Oh.
so I appreciate that you came out on that day. And that's so like when people see people off on the side, that's my safety crew keeping me going. We've been good about keeping the magic behind the scenes secret to this point, but I think we're far enough in the season. And so that little building actually, I'm gonna scroll back just a little bit. So this little building one more time. Let's see here. I'm gonna wait till we get just up a little bit more, and I'll point out exactly what building we're talking about for everyone that's watching. This is always the fun of having a camera strapped to your head, is trying to make sure you're looking at the right things. So if you see that little white building in the background right there, I'm going to pause right now, and you see I'm going to circle it right here with the mouse, that little white building. So that is an old jail, and we're not certain exactly when that was constructed. We believe it's early 20th century because what we use are called Sanborn maps. Actually, if you look at this right here, this is a Sanborn map. So we'll look at these to try to figure out. And so this is a 1912 Sanborn, and you can see there's a little building right here and a building here, and we would have to kind of look at the footprint up above and look at the maps to see if we could find that. But we can figure these things out most of the time. And then also we could look at the dirt. We could see, what's the lot designated as and who was it sold to when, and if the police force ended up purchasing at a certain time.
Isn't I heard someone else was sharing that there were a number of vagrants or tramps that they would follow the railroads, and for a while they would just leave the door open and they just had residents, not really criminals, but in essence just set up like maybe for some of the homeless just floating around, they would just leave the jail open for them to stay.
Yep, and that actually did make it in the papers. That they actually talked about that, and they said that as many as 4 of those people would just have basically run of the jail. They would have a lamp and a fire and a bed without and then they wouldn't be under lock and key. So no, you're totally right. And when we looked at this, like obviously trying to find the history of this was difficult, but what we could do is say, well, if this was built around 1912 or 14 or 15 or 16, what was happening? And one of the interesting stories that I was able to find was on August 1916, the first arrest for speeding in the city limits of Ridgefield was made at that time. And it
Those
was, what was that?
darn Oregonians, right?
Exactly. It was a touring car, and there were three occupants. One man gave his name as Dr. F.R. Shelburne, manager of a dental parlor in Portland. And the fine was $5, which amounted to $6 or $7 with fees. And yes, of course, the first the first ticket was issued to a Portlander that came over to Ridgefield and was speeding through town. And 1916 is really early for cars over in this area because the early automotive districts in most of these towns were really starting to pop up around 1910 1909 to be really generous, all the way through 16. So, and in 16 you still didn't even have a bridge, so they had to put somehow their car on a ferry and get it across, or they came down from north, which obviously the Portland person didn't. So it's fascinating to kind of think of like what it took to come over here and get a ticket at that time. So
That's a lot of gas.
it's a lot of gas. So this, again, we'll talk a little bit more about the history, but this is actually a really big center of community. There's a coffee shop in here, right? At this point.
Oh yeah, they have the best bagel sandwiches
Oh,
and
really?
smoothies. Yeah, and right on these really hot summer days, you can pop by for some ice cream.
Nice. And wait,
Yeah.
you get a beer too, right?
Yes, so I don't often, but it is a nice little spot you can grab. They have some wine and beer, and not during this summer, but we've seen a number of great live musicians play there.
Yeah, because it's kind of because it's Dawn who runs it with is it Erlene?
Yeah, they do a great job with
Yeah.
attracting artists from all over and kind of consistently having a full book.
Yeah, and they run like the little coffee shop and kind of little expanded more than a coffee shop. It's kind of like an ice cream parlor, restaurant, coffee shop out of the front,
Yeah.
and then in the back they have this really nice old school theater that they do shows and they do different events in. I think I see
Yeah.
Tony Starlight up there a lot.
Yeah.
And then they also have had for a period of time they had some movies and conversation pairings happening, and I can't remember what the name of that series was. I feel bad because I totally know it, but they had like a movie conversation series for a time up there too.
Yeah, some really great stuff. And I think they're kind of a mainstay, especially the last, I think over 20 years now. Just really a big part of our community downtown.
Yeah, and this theater, it was built by Red and Sue Hicks in 1946, and they decided to build a theater located here as a tribute and coming home present to their son, who was a returning veteran. And Hicks' son expected their son Frank to actually work and live here, and we saw that plaque for Frank, but unfortunately he was killed in an airplane crash after the war, and as a result the plans for the theater faltered, and it opened on April 25th 1946 as the Liberty Theater. So it wasn't, they didn't they didn't open up and call it old right off the bat. It was just the Liberty at the time. And it featured the Bandits of Sherwood Forest was one of the first films, and it was noted by their granddaughter Marilyn that they built the theater to bring entertainment to Ridgefield, but about the same time television arrived, and the theater turned out to, from what she assessed, not to be a good investment. So eventually the movie screening area was actually pretty brief. Hicks only operated it until about 1951-52, and then after the Hicks sold it, it was repurposed a number of times, and then eventually Dawn and Erling Griswold bought this it was deteriorating building at the time in 1995, and they were actually named Ridgefield's Outstanding Citizens in 2009 for restoring it to its previous glory, and they've brought it back as a really great center of entertainment here in Ridgefield.
Yeah, I think
yeah, it's really incredible. And what's interesting is if you want to incidentally run into anybody in town, you just pop down in the morning to that that coffee place, and you'll find people. And there's quite a few nice little coffee shops. There's also one that's not in a historic building, but Lava Java is right off the freeway, and they also are another really great coffee shop in the area.
I love all the history that they have inside too. So they have a lot of memorabilia and different ties of things that have happened over the years.
Oh yeah, because they have like I think they have like a newspaper and some posters and things from that time.
Yeah, it's pretty yeah, I think there's a lot of memories going back even as a bike shop, and at one point it was a yarn store and kind of so for arts and crafts, and over the years that building has just really lent to a number of things for the community, but most recently it's our favorite place to go get smoothies or espressos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a very neat place, and I believe they did one of the early showings of the I believe the Chinook documentary. I think it's called Promised Land. There was
Oh,
a film that was played there too, so a lot of history, like you said, rolling through that place. And we'll zoom a little forward here. It's
that's
such a
nice.
cool building. So now we're heading back down the street. So now we get a chance we can actually see the brick of that pharmacy building a little bit better. And you can see that Roman brick on that little one. And then this one, you see it has that nice, it has some design to it. And then you can see all the wonderful things in the store there. And then Ridgefield Hardware has a ton of stuff, right? Like they just have all kinds of things.
It's like the best go-to. You might not think that they're going to have it, and they always do. They're a total lifesaver for our project. So, yeah. Not to mention the great coffee cups with Otis for city manager.
Is that the little fella
there?
Yeah,
that's not Otis, but that's the next generation.
That's the next generation. That's awesome. Yeah, and I think upstairs is it vacant, or no? It's a photographer upstairs now.
And I think like a yoga studio or different types of dance and exercise classes are going on now.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was a funny part of our walk, because this person was helping guide traffic and she wasn't quite sure what we were doing, and I'm like, yeah, we're gonna cross here, and she helped us out. That was
yep.
That was really nice of her.
It is.
So the building that we're trying to get to is the sweet shop. I mean, a lot of people remember that fondly, and it's built in 1926, and this building was constructed by R.E. Schroeder for his confectionery store. And Schroeder and his wife Clara, they owned and operated the building for quite some time. And Schroeder actually commissioned the building to be constructed, hiring George Bucher to build it for him. And it was noted at the time that a time capsule was placed in the chimney of the new store. That's what they put in the article, was a chimney. And what's really funny about this is that a couple years ago, when they were renovating the building, they ended up finding the time capsule, and it ended up being placed in City Hall. And when we started conversations, because whenever we do these types of tours, we always reach out to the city and to the Main Street groups, and we want to work with the community to make sure that we're engaging in a way that speaks for the community and highlights history. And we started discussing in that the time capsule, and they said, oh, here's all the stuff, and we don't exactly know the story behind it. Well, in working for this tour, we're actually able to find the article. And so the article we found that talks about this, it says here, quote, George W. Bucher was the originator of the unique idea, being in charge of the construction work. 4 local newspapers, namely the Ridgefield Reflector, the St. Helens Mist, the Kalama Bulletin, and the Kelsonian, were buried beneath the chimney in a small vault, along with some souvenirs. One of those souvenirs reportedly was a photo of Schroeder's daughter, Jean. And what's cool is when they found that, they didn't necessarily know what that photo or who that photo was of, but since we were able to do the research for the tour, now that piece of history has been reconnected and we know who that is. And locally, the shop was referred to as the Sweet Shop, and it was the place to hang out in town for young people when they wanted to have a burger, soda, ice cream. And Schroeder was very civically minded also. In the 1930s, he was the manager of the 4th of July event held by the city's American Legion. And actually, I know this year was not, but have you had a chance to be in downtown for one of those 4th of July celebrations? I never have. So I've heard
it is incredible. And especially now, it's grown so much, but it is definitely our family tradition to come and join the parade and walk down to Overlook with all of they'll have like the food carts and like different little shops, and it's an all day event, and then the fireworks at the end usually. So it's even though it wasn't quite the same this year, there still were quite a few fireworks, and you definitely had a lot of buildings and homes decorated. People were out doing their own social distance parades of themselves, you know, kind of the city encouraged walking the blocks and kind of sharing and participating with all your neighbors. And I think they did a special fundraiser selling t-shirts that they ran out of. So it was really, it was a little bit different, but still kind of that same 4th of July spirit and success. So.
Yeah, which is just amazing. And it's funny because I grew up out in Camas, Washougal, and I actually had a chance when Scott Hewitt from the Columbian was doing an article about 4th of July, or not 4th of July, about gatherings and celebrations. And when I was younger, it was the fort was the place to go. And I actually included my teenage angst moment of when I didn't want to go with my parents to the fort. So I stayed out in Camas, Washougal. And you know, I told him it was like the loneliest 4th of July I've ever spent. And I never declined an invite again. But nowadays, actually, because you know, you were talking about how it's a family tradition. I actually, my family now, we go to the port of Camas, Washougal, because that's where, you know, most of my family lives. And there is a celebration out there now, and it is like each town has kind of started to have its own celebration. So you've got, you know, the port of Camas, Washougal, and then you have this wonderful one in downtown Ridgefield, and then we have the one down at the fort. So it's kind of neat to see our towns grow in that sense and be able to go home to celebrate these events.
Yeah, it's really, it's pretty special. And if you haven't had a chance to attend, I would say to earmark it for a year to come down. The entire Pioneer Street is filled. Maybe 3-4 people deep, and all of the buildings are decorated. There's flags all along the street. The parade's a pretty significant parade, and you see a lot of the local companies involved, and you know, all the kids are dressed up and have their different participation. It is really something special, especially if you have young ones to. Just as observers, they get really engaged. It's a really nice parade that it's kind of slow, but they're really engaging to the onlookers, and the kids just, you know, it's kind of a magical experience that we're really fortunate to have, I think. And it's nice to hear that other towns are starting to, you know, kind of the resurgence of it.
Yeah. And so, you know, it's just very interesting to be able to have these kind of celebrations. And then the last, see, did I move or did I just stand and look at the same building? No, here we go. Look at that. Real on top of things today. Oh, people are having fun. They're watching. So the last one is the Ridgefield City Hall, which originally was the Ridgefield State Bank. And this was built in the 1920s. And actually, so getting back to the time when it was in the hardware store, it was in February of 1910 that the Ridgefield State Bank started operation down at the corner of Pioneer. And so that 1910 date, so we're talking about that building's uncertainty. There's a tie to the bank down on that corner. So again, maybe the building is a little bit older than some of the records are. Maybe it's later. Maybe the bank was in the older building. So this is one of the fun things about history. And I think sometimes people don't realize, like, it's kind of nice sometimes to not know something, because that means there's still mysteries to be solved, and you still have like that ability to kind of sleuth around and find them. So we're still working on pieces. So every time we do, you know, these tours, we add stuff because we're always still trying to look for more. But upon the establishment of the bank, Edward Thompson was the founder and president, and then E.A. Blackmore, so one of the original city people, part of the city government, was vice president, and then Fred Allen was the first cashier. And the bank, by March of 1917, construction had begun on a new building at that space. So again, we're seeing kind of some of that indication there was a building at that other space, and they decided that they would move the bank eventually. So in August of 1920, they proposed a new freestanding bank, which was presented to people, and the cost estimate at that time was about $25,000. So, I mean, you're talking about 1916, a $3,000 Oddfellows building, and then a $25,000 bank. That's a lot of money for that time. And it was to be fashioned with a spacious lobby, private offices for officers and directors, and there was to be public meeting rooms for 20 to 30 people. And then the meeting rooms would be furnished and have an outside entrance. And so eventually this building was constructed, and it's beautiful on the inside. They have lots of different spaces. The vault's still in there. And one of the things we know is in 1936, there was a University of Washington graduate and a local high school teacher that actually decided to join in the business, joining the bank as an assistant cashier. And as he worked over time, as he could, he purchased stock in the bank and also in one in Battleground too, in the Battleground Bank. And by 1950, he was able to actually purchase the Ridgefield State Bank. And at that time, he was a majority holder in the Battleground Bank. So in 1954, this person who was a University of Washington graduate, who was a high school teacher, who was an assistant cashier, in 54, he combined his holdings and he established a bank that was called First Independent Bank. And that person who went from cashier to bank owner was beloved community member Ed Furstenberg. So just that's an amazing story of just perseverance and just strength to go through time and build to the point where he created this bank system. And actually, if you look at like Southwest Washington Medical Center or Peace Health, sorry, talking old school, there's the Furstenberg Tower. I mean, the family's left a philanthropic legacy, has left a legacy with the business. Just an amazing place. And today, this is where the city of Ridgefield administrates, which the city government is pretty active, right, with Main Street.
Yeah, it's great. We have I think it's really nice to see everyone working together really well in downtown. And I don't know that every community has that same, but it's kind of like go to your next door neighbor and just, check in. So, and they're really supportive to all of our businesses as well.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
And I believe tomorrow, if I got my little note that was sent to me correct, is City Days. There's going to be a virtual event.
Yeah, I think they usually kick off the first Saturday of every month, and I believe, this is our big kind of a celebration through the following month. So there's lots of different activities going on.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of, obviously we're all kind of stuck at home right now, and there's a lot of digital. We're doing a virtual walk, so there's digital components to what's happening with City Days and the celebrations, right?
Yes. Yeah, all of the aspects have kind of shifted. We have the big paddle coming up as part of the celebration, which isn't going to be as close, maybe a little more social distancing or on your own. But I think a little bit of a shift, but they've done a really great job moving to virtual.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch, and it's been some engaging stuff. And, it's that time where, we can all just kind of try something different during this period, just like we did with the virtual walks and all of that. So, thank you so much, Kristen, for joining me today. I really appreciate it. It was fun to have you come along, and we love your business because of the focus on history. So, seeing your posts, it just made a lot of sense to have you join us and help us tell a little bit about what's happening and the history that you have been learning from people. So if everyone gives a digital applause and thank you for participating.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. And so I want to thank everybody for joining us today. It's been a pleasure again to do our virtual walking tour. These have been fun. And again, these will be left up on Facebook. We put them up on YouTube. One thing I can tell you all that you've been joining us on these is if you support what we're doing, we definitely need people to join as members of the museum so we can continue our work to gather, save, and share the history and stories of Clark County, because we are 100% committed to doing that. So it's just $40 a year for an individual to be a member, and it's $60 for a family of 4. And it makes a massive difference. And we raise about 90% of what we operate on a year ourselves. So we definitely need your support. So if you love this stuff, please go to our website, sign up for our memberships, and help us out. And next week, we are going to be out in Camas, Washington, and we'll have some special guests for that one. We'll be in historic downtown Camas. And we want to thank the Downtown Camas Association because they have sponsored this tour specifically, and also the program that we did early in the year. And so we really, really appreciate that because we were able to get that tour sponsored thanks to them. And they are a continuous advocate of our work. And so we really appreciate it. And also Ridgefield Main Street is continuing to advocate for our work. So several of our Main Street programs, Vancouver's Downtown Association, Ridgefield Main Street, and Camas Downtown, or Downtown Camas Association, all huge, huge supporters of our work, and they invest in us too. So we really appreciate it. So we will see you next week in Downtown Camas. Thank you all again for being a part of this, and have a great rest of your weekend.